Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we'll be discussing the United Macedonian Diaspora, or UMD, as well as some of the recent controversies which they have been generating. So before we get into that, for those of you who are unaware of the United Macedonian Diaspora, they are essentially a Macedonian American NGO based in Washington, D.C. Now, here in the United States, they are legally categorized as a 501c3 organization. A 501c3 is a type of organization that is involved in charities, foundations, nonprofits, that sort of thing. The name 501c3 simply comes from the section within the Internal Revenue Code that allows for the formation of those types of organizations and the regulations that they have to abide by. So again, legally here, they're a 501c3, but for all intents and purposes, they are what we know as NGOs, or non-governmental organizations. According to their website, they have 3,000 members, and also on their website, in their most recently published financial report from 2020, they appear to have roughly $200,000 in revenue and $160,000 in operating expenses. At least officially, those are their financial numbers. Now, you may be wondering what type of activities specifically the UMD is engaged in. Well, they have various different projects and programs, not just here in the United States, where they're based out of, but also in Canada, in Australia, and to a lesser extent in Europe, basically in places where we have a more substantial ethnic Macedonian diaspora. And they're engaged in various cultural activities, charitable activities. They have a disaster relief fund, for example. But a lot of the controversy they generate is really in regard to their political activities. Now, given the fact that the UMD is a 501c3 organization, their political activities are limited. That's just the nature of a 501c3 and the regulations surrounding it. But nevertheless, they do engage in certain political activities. For example, they get involved with various disputes regarding the Republic of North Macedonia, such as the renaming of the country to North Macedonia. They're very much involved in opposing the name change agreement. We have their president, Mitokolski, always online complaining whenever some news organization uses the term North Macedonia and so forth. Recently, they've been getting more and more engaged in regard to the Bulgarian dispute, the historical dispute between Macedonia and Bulgaria. To make no mistakes about it, they are a firmly Macedonist organization. They hold to a firm Macedonist ideology and history, or pseudo-history, as we would say. So they are firmly Macedonist. We have, again, their president, Mitokolski, who from time to time will have like a video conference with some crackpot academic they dig out of somewhere who tries to legitimize these Macedonist ideas that there was never a Slavic migration to the Balkans, or that there's no relationship between the Macedonians and the Bulgarians. So very much, again, a Macedonist organization. They have some very, very idiotic claims on their website, to be quite frank about it. For example, if you go to their website, it says something along the lines of the saints Cyril and Methodius, that they were ethnic Macedonians who invented the Cyrillic alphabet. As we all know, Cyril and Methodius were not ethnic Macedonians, nor were they Bulgarians. They were Byzantines, they were Romans, and they did not invent the Cyrillic alphabet. That is a very childish mistake. The Cyrillic alphabet was actually invented in the second Bulgarian capital of Preslav at the Preslav Literary School, which was under the direction of Tsar Simeon. The Cyrillic alphabet is a Bulgarian invention. So these are some of the claims put out by the UMD. Now, the reason why I'm making this video specifically is because of the UMD's recent activities within the American political sphere. People have been talking recently about this Macedonian American Congressional Caucus and its recent resolution, House Resolution 741. Now, this caucus is entitled the Congressional Caucus on Macedonia and Macedonian Americans, and it is a bipartisan congressional caucus, meaning that it has members from both parties, both Republicans and Democrats. For those of you who are not from the United States, who are not familiar with the political processes here, a congressional caucus is essentially a group of congressmen who will come together and form a group to pursue certain legislation, usually in regard to a certain topic, a certain ideology, and so forth. For example, there can be a political caucus. The Democrats, for example, have the Progressive Caucus. That is kind of their more left-wing members of the Democratic Party who push for progressive policies and so forth. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Freedom Caucus, which is the more conservative or right-wing elements of the Republican Party who come together to form their own caucus. Again, the Freedom Caucus to push for more right-wing or conservative policies. We also have caucuses that focus on minority rights. There's a Black caucus, an LGBT caucus, and so forth. And that is what this caucus is too. It's a Macedonian caucus, and the purpose of it is to promote Macedonian-American relations and so forth. And the UMD has been very active with this congressional caucus. They have been trying to get congressmen to join the caucus. As of right now, I think there's 24, 25 members of this congressional caucus. I think there's 25 now. I think there were 24, but this past week, I believe Frank Mervan, the Democrat from Indiana, also joined. So there might be 25 at this point. As stated previously, a lot of the controversy surrounding the UMD, the Congressional Caucus, really have to do with this House Resolution 741. Now, that resolution is titled Expressing Support for the Designation of the Month of September 2022 as quote-unquote Macedonian American Heritage Month and celebrating the Macedonian language, history, and culture of Macedonian Americans and their incredible contributions to the United States. Now, the UMD, again, is very heavily involved in pushing this resolution and celebrating the introduction of this resolution into Congress and so forth. And this can be evidenced by their article, which was published on the UMD website less than a month ago on January 24th of 2022. And that article, which I will link to below, is entitled UMD Applauds Congressional Resolution Celebrating Macedonian Heritage. And the first couple paragraphs of that article read as follows, quote, the United Macedonian Diaspora, or UMD, the leading nonpartisan voice of our nation's 500,000 Americans of Macedonian heritage, applauds the introduction of House Resolution 741, expressing support for the designation of the month of September 2022 as quote-unquote Macedonian American Heritage Month and celebrating the Macedonian language, history, and culture of Macedonian Americans and their incredible contributions to the United States. The UMD thanks the co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus on Macedonia and Macedonian Americans, Representatives Brendan Boyle, Democrat from Pennsylvania, Debbie Dingell, Democrat from Michigan, Lisa McClain, Republican from Michigan, and Claudia Tenney, Republican from New York, for their strong efforts and leadership in introducing House Resolution 741, as well as a founding member of the caucus, Representative Bill Pascrell, Democrat from New Jersey, for recently co-sponsoring House Resolution 741. Now, I will post a link down below to the resolution itself on the congressional website so you can read it in its entirety if you're interested, but let's just go through some of the paragraphs within that resolution to see what it contains. So it starts by stating, quote, whereas there is evidence that the earliest Macedonian presence in the continental United States arrived on or around the year 1492. Now, right off the bat, some people might be very confused by this claim that Macedonians have a presence in the continental U.S. From the late 15th century. That's very confusing to people who don't really know what this is in reference to. What this is in reference to is the legend of Dragan of Ohrid. So if we look at Croatian-American professor George Perpich from John Carroll University in his book South Slavic Immigration in America, we will see that his chapter regarding the Macedonians and Bulgarians starts by stating, quote, the smallest of the South Slavic ethnic groups in America are the Bulgarians. One branch of them are the Macedonians. Even though they were the last to join the migration from the Balkans to the North American continent, one of them was among the sailors of Columbus, when he discovered America in 1492. His name was Dragan. He was a native of the town of Ohrid, an important center of Bulgarian culture and religion, which is now located in the Republic of Macedonia, Yugoslavia. Dragan belonged to the Bogomil sect, which was regarded as heretical by both Catholic and Orthodox churches. He made his way to Spain, but was discovered as a religious dissenter and was condemned by the authorities to die on the stake at Salamanca. He was saved from certain death by Columbus, who was gathering his motley crew before sailing to America. Dragan, who was an experienced gunner, thus became a valuable member of Columbus's crew. Following the discovery, before Columbus returned to Spain, Dragan was left with 42 other sailors at the newly built fortress La Navidad. Subsequently, he survived the Indian massacre. Dragan da Lichnida is mentioned in contemporary eyewitness accounts in the Spanish court. Lichnida is the old name for Ohrid. So we see here what this line within the resolution is referring to is Dragan of Ohrid. Now, there's a lot of problems with this claim. First of all, Columbus never came to the continental United States. Columbus sailed in 1492 to the Caribbean. Additionally, Dragan of Ohrid, even if this person existed, I think this is a bit of a legend, but nevertheless, let's assume this is completely true, that this person existed and he was a member of Columbus's crew. He would not have been an ethnic Macedonian. There's no ethnic Macedonians in the 15th century. This would have been a Bulgarian from Ohrid who, again, left due to persecution based on the fact that he was a Bogomil, a religious heretic, and so forth. So, again, a Bulgarian sailing on a Spanish mission to the Caribbean is now being categorized as a Macedonian American. Again, this is a completely ridiculous portion within the resolution, and we will see here that this is the first example where this resolution takes Macedonian Bulgarians from the region of Macedonia, and converts their identity into ethnic Macedonians. And again, this is just the first example. We will, as we go further, we will see more recent examples of this occurring. The resolution goes on to state, quote, "Whereas since the 1880s, tens of thousands of Macedonians fled to America seeking civil liberties, human rights, religious freedom, and economic opportunities, and in response to the 1903 Ilinden Uprising against the Ottoman Empire, the 1912 to 1913 Balkan Wars, the two World Wars, the Greek Civil War, and the policies of communist Yugoslavia." Now, the problem with this section and the problem with this whole resolution is the deliberate obfuscation of what it means to be a Macedonian in this historical context. As we know very well, and as I documented quite extensively in my video from last month on the Macedonian Patriotic Organization and on the Macedonian-Bulgarian immigration to the United States, is that these tens of thousands of Macedonians coming to the United States in the late 19th and into the early 20th century are not ethnic Macedonians. They are Macedonian-Bulgarians. They are ethnic Bulgarians from Macedonia. There's no mention of Macedonian-Bulgarians, of Bulgarians at all in this resolution, and that's one of the main problems with it, is that it completely distorts the historical record. It takes people who we know are Bulgarians by their own admission, by the churches they formed, by the organizations they formed, by the publications they formed, that these people were Bulgarians, but this resolution and this paragraph here attempts to turn them into ethnic Macedonians. This is the same crude revisionism that Macedonists engage in, and that they have apparently tricked these congressional members into going along with. So that is the problem here. There are no real ethnic Macedonians in the 1880s into the late 19th, into the early 20th century. There are some fringe elements. There are some intellectuals who do promote a Macedonist position at this time. This is not the vast majority of the Slavic population in Macedonia. It doesn't really make sense. If there's a firm ethnic Macedonian identity in the 1880s, then why is Krsto Misirkov in 1903 arguing for the creation of an ethnic Macedonian identity? None of this makes sense. We know it doesn't make any sense, but nevertheless, they still continue on with this falsification of the historical record. The resolution goes on to state, quote, "Whereas currently the Macedonian community in the United States is a vibrant one that is embedded within the American mosaic, partaking in all walks of life: business, medicine, law, technology, civic engagement, government, the military, education, the arts, culinary world, athletics, and more. Whereas the United Macedonian Diaspora estimates there are half a million Americans of Macedonian heritage living in the United States, with sizable communities in Michigan, New York, Ohio, New Jersey, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Florida, California, Arizona, Texas, and Virginia, whereas Macedonian American immigrants contributed to building monumental American transportation routes such as the Great Northern Railroad. And then the resolution goes on to list various Macedonian Americans which are to be honored and celebrated. Now, one of the very first people listed in this resolution as a Macedonian American is Stoan Kristo. Stoan Kristo was an American writer and politician. We discussed Stoan Kristo a little bit in a previous episode from last month on the Macedonian Patriotic Organization and the Macedono-Bulgarian immigration to the United States. So let's see what this resolution has to say about him. It writes, quote, "Whereas Macedonian American Stoan Kristo, who immigrated to the United States in 1911, was an American author, journalist, World War II intelligence officer, and Vermont state representative and senator who wrote the book This Is My Country, which was a favorite of President Franklin D. Roosevelt." Now, I actually have a first edition copy of This Is My Country, which is it's a semi-autobiographical novel written by Stoan Kristo in regard to his life here, coming to America, and so forth. So this all begs the question of whether Stoan Kristo was a Macedonian American and what that term even means. So if we look at the concept of a hyphenated American here in the United States, basically a blank dash American, we see that it is essentially an ethnic designation of a type of American. So, for example, if we have the term Anglo-American, Anglo-American, that is an American who is ethnically English or Anglo. Same thing if we look at the term Italian American, that is an American who is ethnically Italian. An Irish American is an American who is ethnically Irish. Same thing for German American, Polish American, etc. So that is what that means. So if you look at the term Macedonian American, that is simply a designation which means an American who is ethnically Macedonian. Now, that again raises the question of whether Stoan Kristo considered himself an ethnic Macedonian or whether his use of the term Macedonian means something else. Now, luckily for us, in George Perpich's work on the South Slavic immigration to America, he actually writes about Stoan Kristo and his ethnic and national identification. Perpich writes, quote, "Surprisingly, many educated Bulgarians embraced Americanization eagerly and deliberately severed all ties with their mother country. This was, for instance, the case of the Bulgarian Stoan Kristo, a fairly successful American writer. Born in 1896 in Konomladi, Macedonia, he came to the United States as a young lad and was educated at Valparaiso University in Valparaiso, Indiana. He described in his autobiography how he eagerly embraced Americanization. To him, this was not the shock of alienation. Kristo claims that while visiting in Bulgaria in the spring of 1938, during the audience with King Boris in Sofia, it was easier for him to talk to the king in English than in his native Bulgarian. He felt that, quote, America, my America, stretched her arms across the distance so that I might hold on to her hand, end quote. So poignant was his nostalgia for America that he could hug a Ford car just because it was made there. He was afraid that after a few months he might become, quote-unquote, re-Balkanized, and was happy when his friends told him, quote, you belong to America. America belongs to you. You don't know how fortunate you are. Perpich goes on to write, quote, Kristo, who partly anglicized his Bulgarian family name, after all his eager attempts to become a true American, reflected in one of his writings upon some of the problems that Bulgarians experienced in the process of becoming Americans. Quote, while I am not a whole American, neither am I what I was when I first landed here, that is, a Bulgarian, he wrote. His inherited native traits barred him from complete assimilation. As a visitor in Bulgaria, he felt, quote, like a foreigner and was so regarded. While in Bulgaria, he was not a whole Bulgarian. In the United States, he was not wholly American. Thus, he had to go through life with a dual nationality. So we can see here, based on Stoan Kristov's own words, that he is not an ethnic Macedonian. He is an ethnic Bulgarian from Macedonia. In essence, he is a Macedono-Bulgarian. There is no doubt that he referred to himself as a Macedonian, as do I, but again, that does not negate his Bulgarian ethnicity. That is one of the main problems with this resolution, is that it takes people who would have identified as ethnic Bulgarians and it completely removes the Bulgarian element from their identity and recast them as ethnic Macedonians. That is essentially what Macedonist revisionism does all the time, is it takes something that was Bulgarian historically and rewrites it as purely Macedonian. So we will see this in an even more egregious example as we move further down this list of people in the resolution itself. Now, the most egregious and shameless example of Macedonist revisionism that occurs within this resolution is actually in regard to Dr. Peter T. George. The resolution states as follows, quote, "Whereas Macedonian-American Dr. Peter T. George won 3 Olympic medals for the United States in weightlifting, 5 world championships, and was the middleweight champion at the Pan American Games, and later went on to become a doctor in oral medicine and pioneered treatments for obstructive sleep apnea." Now, the reason why this portion of the resolution is the most infuriating and where the UMD completely crosses the line and in fact gets caught completely red-handed is in the fact that less than 10 years ago, Dr. George actually wrote an article in the Macedonian Tribune where he speaks directly to his ethnicity. We see here in the Macedonian Tribune for January 9th of 2014, on the bottom of page 1, there's an article by Dr. George entitled, "Am I Macedonian?" He speaks, again, directly to this issue, and I will read the whole article in its entirety because it's actually not very long at all. But before I do that, there is a little biographical section here on Dr. George, so let's just read that very quickly so you get more of an idea of who he was. Dr. Peter T. George, DDS, a Columbia-trained orthodontist, includes Miss Universe, 2 Miss Americas, and Hollywood celebrities and their children among his list of treated patients, but his list of interests and achievements range well beyond dentistry. He served as an assistant clinical professor at the John H. Burns School of Medicine, University of Hawaii School of Medicine, and has lectured internationally. His findings and commentaries on various topics have been published in leading national and international medical and dental journals. He invented and reported in the New England Journal of Medicine the first oral device to prevent severe obstruction sleep apnea and common household snoring, and is the founder of the American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine. His patented inventions to treat medical and dental disorders are extensively used worldwide. Dr. George is an Olympic gold medalist in weightlifting, and at the time of his retirement from competition had accumulated more international gold and silver medals than any other athlete in the history of the sport. He was a member of the International Weightlifting Federation Medical Committee and was selected to coach the 1980 USA Olympic team, which boycotted the Moscow Games. His biography is in the marquee Who's Who in America, Who's Who in Medicine and Healthcare, and Who's Who in the World. He is the only American weightlifter included in the History's Greatest Olympians trading card series. Dr. George is the son of Trajan and Paraskeva Talev. He has 2 sons, Barton and Trajan, and lives in Honolulu with his wife, Lazarina. Now the article itself. Am I Macedonian? By Dr. Peter T. George, DDS. Quote, "When I was a boy and had to fill out a form asking my nationality, I didn't know what to enter. American, Macedonian, Bulgarian, Turk, Serb, Yugoslavian, or Greek. All of my ancestors that I'm aware of were born in or near what is today Bitola, Macedonia. So you may say, it's obvious, you're Macedonian. But my parents always said that they were Bulgarians. Was Bitola ever in Bulgaria? Yes, for centuries before the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans, Bitola was a city in Bulgaria. Then for the next 5 centuries, Bitola was in Turkey. In fact, in 1906, when my father first arrived in the United States from Bitola, his passport indicated that he was Turkish. In 1878, Russia declared war on Turkey and freed all of Bulgaria, from the Black Sea to Lake Ohrid. My ancestors, along with the majority of the people in Macedonia, rejoiced. They were now free and could call themselves Bulgarians. But Britain and Austria-Hungary became alarmed. They worried that a large free Bulgaria might become an ally of Russia and upset the balance of international power. They quickly persuaded Russia to agree to the splintering off of the Macedonian area of Bulgaria and returning it to Turkey. All of my ancestors again lost their freedom and again became Turks. In 1912, in an attempt to reunite with the Bulgarians in Macedonia, Bulgaria joined forces with Greece and Serbia to drive Turkey completely out of the Balkans. Toward the end of the resultant war, while the Bulgarian army was concentrated at its southeastern border, driving the Turks across it, the Serbian army occupied northern Macedonia and the Greek army occupied southern Macedonia. Afterward, neither of these two armies would allow the Bulgarians to enter Macedonia. The Greeks justified their confiscation of Macedonia on the basis that it was the land of Alexander the Great, plus their disputed claim that he was Greek. They therefore claimed that Macedonia was theirs, and that the inhabitants were Slavophone Greeks. The Serbs' justification was that in a previous war they had conquered and occupied a large part of Macedonia and even moved their national capital into Macedonia. They therefore claimed northern Macedonia was really southern Serbia. When my mother arrived in the United States from Bitola in 1926, her passport indicated she was Serbian. In 1929, Serbia became part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and the inhabitants of Bitola became Yugoslavians. As a child in grade school, I would fill in the nationality blank with Yugoslavian with no idea what Yugoslavia was. In 1944, to dissuade the people in the territory of Macedonia from thinking of themselves as Bulgarians who want to reunite with their mother country, President Tito officially incorporated the geographical area into Yugoslavia as the Socialist Republic of Macedonia. To encourage a distinct Macedonian identity, he ordered linguistic scholars to change the structure and alphabet of the language used by the people just enough to differentiate it from Bulgarian. In 1991, after the breakup of Yugoslavia, Macedonia became an independent nation. So then I could fill in the blank that asked for my nationality with Macedonian. No, the word Macedonia, like the other words America, Canada, or Australia, is a country name indicating a geographical location. It does not indicate a racial or ethnic origin. In America, when someone asks me what my nationality is, I assume he or she is asking about my ethnic origin. If, for example, my parents were Japanese born in Macedonia, I would say my nationality is Japanese. My parents, however, were Bulgarians born in Macedonia. I therefore must say that my nationality is Bulgarian. So here we see a perfect example of how ridiculous this entire resolution is. Someone who less than 10 years ago, in an article entitled "Am I Macedonian?" writes in no uncertain terms that he is a Bulgarian by ethnicity and nationality, gets turned into a Macedonian American by the UMD by this resolution. I mean, this is just completely sick. I mean, it is, I don't know what other words to put it. It is ridiculous. It is obscene how they do this shameless revisionism of turning Bulgarians, clear-cut Bulgarians, into ethnic Macedonians. It's just, I'm at a loss for words of how they have the ability to do this and still sleep at night. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, what's even more sickening about this whole thing with Dr. George is that the man died last year in July of 2021. And they're already lying about him. It's less than a year from his death that they're already turning him from a Bulgarian into an ethnic Macedonian. And keep this in mind, this resolution, House Resolution 741, was introduced into Congress in October of 2021, October of last year. That is 3 months after Dr. George died. Less than 3 months after he dies, he is already being turned into an ethnic Macedonian when he clearly writes that he is not an ethnic Macedonian, that he is a Bulgarian. So if they're doing this to people who died less than a year ago, imagine what these Macedonists are doing to people who died 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. I mean, this is just completely shameless and reprehensible. There's no other words to describe this.
Do you understand how ill you are? You're completely delusional. It is crazy. It is sickening, to be totally honest.
Now, just to be clear here, I have, in principle, absolutely no problem with a Macedonian American caucus, with the designation Macedonian American, with September of 2022 being Macedonian American month. I really don't have a problem with any of that. I have never denied the existence of a modern day Macedonian ethnicity. I completely acknowledge that the Macedonian ethnicity is a reality today, regardless of how we got here. It does exist. There are people who refer to themselves as ethnic Macedonians, who refer to their language as Macedonian, and I completely respect that. I have never told an ethnic Macedonian, not once, that no, you're not Macedonian, you're a Bulgarian. I would never do that. If you don't feel like you're a Bulgarian, if you feel like an ethnic Macedonian, that is completely your right to identify as an ethnic Macedonian. It's not my job, nor do I want to convince Macedonians that they are Bulgarians. That's completely their position. That's their decision to make. And therefore, if Macedonian Americans want to create organizations and have caucuses that pursue their interests, fine. I have really, again, no problem with that. However, this historical falsification must come to an end, and it will come to an end. We cannot continue desecrating dead people's identities and falsifying history, lying about people, lying about organizations, lying about entire periods of Balkan history. That is going to come to an end. And as much as I really dislike the quote-unquote Bulgarian veto because it damages the Macedonian-Bulgarian relationship, at the end of the day, I feel that it is ultimately a necessary step by Bulgaria. This resolution House Resolution 741, which is the product of the UMD, a Macedonist NGO, is a perfect example of why Bulgaria must hold a firm position on the Macedonian question, because they can't be allowed to continue doing this. They can't be allowed to falsify history, desecrate dead people's identities, and so forth. At the end of the day, the Bulgarian veto not only prevents Macedonia from spreading these falsifications throughout the rest of the European Union, but it signals to the rest of the world that there's something wrong here, something very deeply wrong here. And listen, at the end of the day, the solution to the Macedonian-Bulgarian dispute is actually quite simple. It is a very straightforward solution, in my opinion. All Bulgaria has to do is acknowledge the modern-day existence of ethnic Macedonians and of a modern Macedonian language. In exchange for that, Macedonia must recognize the historical reality and must end its historical falsifications. So that is the only solution that exists in my eyes to this dispute. Both sides have to recognize something. The Bulgarians, again, have to recognize that there are today ethnic Macedonians who speak a Macedonian language according to them, and there's really nothing Bulgaria is going to do to change that. On the other hand, in exchange for that recognition, Macedonia has to end this nonsense about turning Bulgarians into Macedonians, about turning the IMRO into a Macedonist organization, to turn the Ilinden uprising into a Macedonist uprising, even turning medieval Bulgarian rulers such as Samuel into ethnic Macedonians. That all has to come to an end. So that is really the solution to this dispute as I see it. And that solution not only brings an end to this dispute between these two nations, but it also solves this Macedonian identity crisis. It puts the distortions to the Macedonian identity to rest and allows the Macedonians to move on a healthy path towards their ethnogenesis. So again, this resolution is an example of what not to do in terms of the Macedonian-Bulgarian dispute, and why this resolution is harmful. Not only does it distort the identity of people like Stoan Kristo, like Dr. Peter T. George, but it continues the unnecessary conflict between the two modern nations of Macedonia and Bulgaria. Now, if you oppose this resolution, if you oppose House Resolution 741, then there is still time to act and hopefully bring this resolution to an end before it moves any further through Congress. As of today, as of February 20th, 2022, no formal action, no formal proceedings have taken place in Congress other than the initial introduction of this resolution to the House Committee on Oversight and Reform back in October of 2021. So Again, there is still time before this resolution moves any further. For example, the MPO, the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, through its Chicago chapter, MPO Pirin, has put forward a petition to the congressional co-sponsors voicing their opposition to the resolution based on the grounds that it engages in historical revisionism. I will put a link to that petition down below so you can sign it. And so you can add your signature to the list. The more signatures there are on that petition, the greater effect it has if and when these congressional co-sponsors see the petition. Now, I'm very cynical when it comes to petitions. I really don't think they do much. However, it doesn't hurt to add your name to a petition. So again, it's one thing we can do to, again, show that there is opposition to the historical revisionism that is taking place within this resolution. Again, we don't oppose the resolution because it calls or it acknowledges the existence of ethnic Macedonians or of Macedonian Americans. The resolution has a long list of names on there of people who I have no doubt refer to themselves as ethnic Macedonians or as Macedonian Americans. Again, we don't oppose the concept that a Macedonian ethnicity exists. What we oppose is historical revisionism, this idea that people from, the 15th century, like Dragan of Ohrid, that people from the late 19th, early 20th century who came from Macedonia were ethnic Macedonians, when in fact they were Macedono-Bulgarians, ethnic Bulgarians, especially when it comes to examples like this with Dr. Peter George, shameless and really unforgivable historical revisionism in regards to a person who died just last year. I mean, this is stuff that really there's no excuse for. So we need to push back as much as possible, but at the end of the day, I'm very pessimistic that we'll be able to put an end to this resolution, and that is simply due to the fact that there is no equivalent Bulgarian-American infrastructure in the United States to push back against the UMD's efforts. If we are to win in this fight against Macedonism, specifically here in the United States and in the diaspora in Canada and Australia and so forth, that is something we are going to need to change in the future. We can't let the Macedonists have all the ground when it comes to these efforts in Congress and in regards to forming these organizations. We need to build an equivalent Bulgarian-American infrastructure here in the United States and abroad in Canada and Australia and so forth. So that is again, something that needs to get worked on in the future. That's not something that I individually can do. That is something that's going to take collective action, but that is a discussion for another day. So with all that being said, I will end this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.